This is Hidden Killers Week in Review.
A look back at the most prolific stories of the week.
This is Hidden Killers with Tony Brueski. Here now, Tony Brueski.
So here's where the story goes off the rails in a way that almost makes you laugh. If it weren't tied to the brutal deaths of 4 people and a baby abandoned in a yard. Austin Drummond, accused of gunning down an entire family, now says he wasn't really a killer at all. No, in his version, he was a confidential informant for the FBI. That's right. According to him, the same guy with a rap sheet longer than a CVS receipt, the guy who had once tried to shoot a prison guard, the guy who smuggled booze and gaming consoles into jail, was secretly a Fed asset helping clean up corruption in Tennessee prisons. That's the story. That's the bill of goods. If that sounds ridiculous to you, you're not alone. But here's the problem. When someone tosses out a story that big, there are always going to be a few people who stop and ask, but what if? And what if is what makes narratives like this dangerous. Not because they're true, not because they're designed to confuse, distract, and muddy the waters in ways that make prosecutors work twice as hard and conspiracy theorists twice as loud. Now, in fairness, law enforcement does recruit informants. They do turn criminals into sources, sometimes reluctantly, because those people have access no one else does. But the idea that someone is erratic, manipulative, and uncontrollable as Austin Drummond would be trusted to operate as an official FBI source, that's not just unlikely, it's laughable. And yet, he's pushing this story with a straight face, claiming his cover was blown and that he was somehow directly involved in the murders without ever saying what that means. So, let's cut through the noise, shall we? What would it actually take for someone like Drummond to be recruited as a confidential human source? What controls are in place to prevent someone like him from spinning out of control, or worse, from using the status to shield their own crimes? And if this is just one more manipulation tactic from a lifelong manipulator, what does that reveal about his state of mind right now, sitting in jail, staring at the possibility of the death penalty? That's where I turn to retired FBI special agent and behavioral expert, former chief of the Counterintelligence Behavioral Analysis Program for the FBI, who spent his career handling informants and counterintelligence sources, the real kind, not the jailhouse fantasy version Drummond wants us to picture. I got to ask, point blank, when you hear a quadruple murder suspect suddenly claim he's been a federal informant all along, what goes through your head?
I'll give you one word. Ha!
I was going to go with bullshit, but
I knew what you were. That's why I was even going to slim it down to one. Likelihood of that is slim to none.
Yeah.
With a lot of reasons that are pretty obvious. First of all, control. This guy would be a controlled nightmare of any handler. And you'd have to get otherwise illegal activity authorized. You need a lot of special permissions to do something like this. And for what gain? And you couldn't, he's a lifelong liar. Mm-hmm. You couldn't believe anything he's saying anyway. The whole premise of it is ludicrous. That's why I'm glad he's trying to do that, because it's just adding lies on top of lies.
It's quite a story. I got to say, wow, bonus points for coming up with this one. We hear a lot of stories from people who get caught. This one I don't think we've heard in at least quite a while. I know other people have made that up and tried to use this excuse in the past, but
heard it.
Yeah. But this one just doesn't come to mind anytime recently. Let's talk about it for a second, because you're going to have your conspiracy theorists, and that's what he's adding fuel to his own fire, and I think he knows that. So you're still going to have conspiracy theorists saying, "But what if? What if?" Let's talk about what it would take to be a confidential informant for the FBI, and would they ever want a confidential informant for what he's claiming he was an informant for?
So The reason to have a confidential human source or informant is it's an investigative technique, and it's considered a sophisticated investigative technique. You do things like that on your escalation of sophistication, your escalation of intrusiveness in people's lives. And so it's usually one of the ones you go to first. But in order to do it, there's a lot of checks and balances that are put into place because of dealing with some real nutters out there. And also people try to profit from these things. People try to use it as leverage for manipulation like this guy is. And so in the world of counterintelligence, when I was working with confidential human sources, the first thing you want to have is a confidential human source that one has access. And so, okay, he checks the box on access. The second thing is to access to information that is actually going to be used in an investigation. So, and he makes claims that he was helping out with these investigations. So next the question is, so why him? Why would those investigations rise to the level that they'd want more intrusive technique like that and utilize in him? Because the next thing that you're looking at when it comes to competent human sources is what I've already said already is control. You control the actions of the individual so they don't go beyond the bounds of their tasking. Because if you are tasking a competent human source or something, the Bureau is now liable for those taskings. So a lot of times we put more restraints on what they can and can't do, what they can and can't say, so they don't get themselves in trouble and go over the edge of illegal activity. Because if it's illegal activity that hasn't been authorized by the Attorney General, then you can't use it in court. So it's useless information because it was gotten illegally because they didn't have authorization to do this illegal activity. And then the information coming from them, you'd have to get 5 other sources just corroborate his information. So it's just ludicrous that. Now, I'm not saying it's not a remote possibility. If there's a high-end investigation that they didn't have any other way to get at someone at and get information for, but the likelihood is slim to none. And also the other thing when it comes to that control issue is control, not just from the sense of doing things illegally, but control of their mouth, of running off, doing exactly what he's doing now. And that is sharing that he's a competent human source for the FBI. Because as soon as someone does that, they're done.
Yeah.
They're cut off. And if there's any hints that they might even do that, they won't even be considered for a competent human source. So our level of scrutiny, both at the case agent level, where it's me trying to recruit someone, and the checks and balances we have that go up the chain of command, especially if you're utilizing someone inside the prison system, because now, oh my gosh, the approvals you need to do something like this are profound, because you're going to have to let the prison know. You're going to have to let a prosecutor know. So every time you let more people know, the chances of him being discovered are even higher. So then there's a threat to him. Just see what I mean?
It doesn't exactly keep it confidential once you have to let everyone know, hey, by the way, this guy's over here doing this. Don't tell anyone.
And it totally negates the whole purpose of having one.
Exactly. It doesn't make any sort of sense.
None.
Let me ask you this. I mean, has there ever been situations where you have a confidential human source and, they are working it and they get caught up in something like this because I don't understand where on earth or how, murdering 4 people plays into any of this. But he's trying to play it off as a hit and he didn't get hit. So he got away and he took the baby. Is there ever a situation where the confidential human source ends up being in a situation like this? And this sort of thing happens where their life comes into danger. They were working, but now suddenly they're exposed and they try and say, look, I was just doing my job. And then the FBI says, you never worked for us. That's not true. You're full of shit. Would they ever admit if there was if they were a confidential human source, period? I'm playing the role of the conspiracy theorists that are going to ask every damn question in the book on this.
Yeah, that is a possibility, because one of the things that you sometimes brief human sources on is that, hey, if you are discovered, we're going to deny. We're also very, they're very aware that they are not to conduct any illegal activity. And if they are, they're completely cut off and done and disowned. So there's a lot of prerequisites. I'm trying to remember the actual briefing. We actually had to give them this kind of briefing and actually have them sign a document that we put in our file saying that they'd been briefed on their parameters, on what they could and couldn't do and things like that. And so the conspiracy theorists, I'm on board with the fact that if he did something this heinous, that there's a potentiality of him being disowned and us denying it if it was true. But my counter to that is he would never been on board to begin with.
Sure.
There's the probability of him being on board. Now, could he have been on board at some point in his career and life? Possibly.
For something. Yeah.
So a lot of times what happens in life is people will take an instant and exaggerate it beyond what it actually is to fit their needs in the moment.
Sure.
And that's what I did when I was an undercover. When I was an undercover agent doing undercover work, I never really totally lied. I took an inkling of a hobby or an interest I had and accelerated it to what I actually did as a profession. So I was able to talk to it. I was able to be passionate about it. And so there's a possibility at some point he may have been, I don't know if he might have been opened up as a competent human source, but he might have been discussing and giving information back when he was a gangbanger still on the street or when he's still dealing drugs. And so would he have been approached by law enforcement as a potentiality, hey, we can lessen your sentence or something like that earlier on his criminal career if you did X, Y, and Z? That's a possibility, although he was really young and typically dealing with someone so young when they're first incarcerated, like 14 years old.
Very young.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, that it keeps going back to, can you reasonably trust this individual to not disclose what it is they're doing to anyone? Can you trust the information they're providing? Can they maintain secure communications with us to keep themselves safe and keep the relationship safe? So the possibility, again, of him even doing it at some point in his life prior to this is so remote. So if that was to happen, I'll go down that road, the conspiracy theory road. The agent doing it would have had to been an idiot. And the entire chain of command that authorized it. This would be like the dumbest thing you could ever do.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, so play this one forward. Is there any investigation that he could actually provide information for that would be so valuable that they want that kind of risk? Because he is a high risk source. This dude is a bomb waiting to go off any moment. And that's very apparent to everyone on his entire arc. I mean, he's been a nutter his whole life. And so the probability of us want to have someone like that on board for any level of investigation, I don't care how profound it is, that's a push. That's a real, I just don't see it happen. I've never seen anyone like this coming on board.
What you just heard from Robin really underscores how thin Drummond's FBI story actually is. It's not just that it doesn't make sense. It's that it couldn't make sense. The FBI doesn't hand out informant badges to anyone who asks nicely. They don't bring on people who are uncontrollable, manipulative, and prone to blowing their own cover the second it suits them. That's a liability, not an asset. And yet, this is where we are. This is who he appears to be. So many questions that still lie out there about this man. He's taking a shred of plausibility, and yes, sometimes criminals do become informants, and inflating it into a shield against accountability. It's classic misdirection. You focus on the FBI cover story, and suddenly the conversation isn't about 4 dead bodies and a baby abandoned in the grass. It's about whether maybe, just maybe, he was doing the government's work. It's manipulative, it's dangerous, and it's exactly the kind of trick someone like him would try to turn to when cornered, like he is. But here's the bigger issue. What if he believes it? What if, in the chaos of running through the woods for days, cut off from reality, Drummond convinced himself this really was his role? That's where things get even scarier, because it suggests he's not just lying to buy time, but he may be living inside his own lie. And if that's the case, then prosecutors aren't just up against a manipulator. They're up against someone who could be so deep in self-delusion that he thinks murder can be reframed as part of the job. It's a tactic that might sway a few people, the same way wild conspiracy theories always find an audience. But in the courtroom, Robin makes clear it collapses under the weight of procedure, oversight, and simple common sense. There's too many safeguards, too many checks, too many people who would have to sign off on a nightmare candidate like Drummond. It just doesn't add up. So where does that leave us? With the suspect trying to spin his way out of 4 murder charges, with the community left to wonder how much damage one man can do, and with an FBI informant story that plays more like bad fiction than credible defense. But don't worry, we're not done. Because while Drummond was wearing his tail, 3 other people were busy helping him stay on the run. And their story opens an entirely different chapter in this case. That's coming up. Be sure to press subscribe so you don't miss it. And let me know what your thoughts are on this whole thing in the comment section on YouTube. If you're not there already, just search Hidden Killers with Tony Brueski, and you will find us. You can find us wherever you get podcasts as well, so you can take us with you wherever you go. Hit subscribe, and let me know what your thoughts are. Until next time, I'm Tony Brueski. We'll talk again real soon.
Want more on this case and others? Then press subscribe now and don't miss a moment of true crime coverage from Tony Brueski and the Hidden Killers podcast.